Alright, today's lesson 11.4a will be talking about shifting our conic sections. So in the middle column here is your center at 0, 0. I know the parabola doesn't have a center, it's the vertex is 0, 0, but that is the origin still. So for the middle one, we've already talked about all these equations already in their origin form. So now we're moving them to the center of HK, where their equations will differ a little bit. Okay, so everywhere you have a y, basically, is minus k next to it. And then everywhere you see an x, usually, there'll be a minus h next to it. Okay, so just remember when we're plugging those in, because they're negative, it means it's the opposite of what it's supposed to be. So whatever you see should be the opposite of that value. But if you notice, nothing else has changed other than just the center. So we're just tacking on this HK center to this thing. It was the same thing for parabola, ellipse, and hyperbola. We could have said y minus 0 and x minus 0. It would have been the same thing, but it's unnecessary to write that. So that's why we omit that for that. So take a moment, pause the video for that so you can see. I'll move it down here as well so you can see the hyperbola. Take a moment to write the ones in the right column down. You already got the ones in the middle column. Okay? But let's move on. Okay, so now we're going to actually apply this. So the first step, kind of like all the other ellipses or the other conic sections, we first graph them. So by stating first the important information and then we graph is the first step, and then from there we'll be able to write the equations. Okay. Now, in a sense, some of this you have to write the equations as well. That's where this completing the square thing comes in to play today. Is that we'll have to be able to complete the square coming from a general form to putting in its standard form. Okay. So example 1, A has a formula or equation already written for us. It's already set in standard form for us, which is nice. Now notice that we need to also be able to identify what we're looking at because we're going to be talking about parabolas, ellipses, and hyperbolas all at the same time. So here, because you have x squared and y squared, that means it has to be an ellipse or an hyperbola, and because in between the two is a plus sign, it must be an ellipse. Okay? So that's kind of how I determine it. If it's a hyperbola, it would be x squared, y squared, but also there would be a minus attached to one of those. And if it was a parabola, it would be one of them squared and the other one's not. So that those are the main differences between them, and they're easy to spot once you get it into standard form. And maybe even not in standard form. General form is easy to determine if it's a parabola, but hyperbola and ellipses, you might have to do a little extra digging to identify which one's which. Okay, so here, since I'm given an ellipse, I'm going to use my ellipse stuff. So ellipses, my center is now not at the origin anymore, so I need to state what that is. So here the x is -2 and the y or the k value is 1. Remember, it's the opposite. Remember, the a value, or a squared value, is the biggest number in ellipses, so that must mean that a squared is 16. So a's got to be 4. So then that means that b squared is 9 here, so b must be 3. Okay? So remember that because a squared is underneath the y squared, it's going to be longer on the y-axis, or vertical. So now it's not really going to be on the y-axis anymore. It's going to be moving around, but it's still vertical axis or major axis. So I also need to find c. So c squared, remember, is equal to a squared minus b squared. So c squared will equal 16 minus 9, which gives us 7. So the square root of that gives me a square root of 7. Okay? So now, because you are changing the center, okay, that also means that you need to change all your other stuff, okay? So instead of where you have 0 for your stuff, you're going to be, or your 0p. So let's go back. Kind of ellipses has a center of, like if you had 0, 0. Remember the major axis, or the vertices, would have been this, for the y anyway, would have been 0, comma p, plus or minus, or sorry, a. I'm thinking of our parabolas. And then foci would have been 0, comma, plus or minus c. But now, since you're moving everything, okay, so then here, now you have a new vertices where it's going to be h, comma, k plus or minus a. Okay? And your foci are going to change as well, where they're going to be h, comma, k plus or minus c. Okay? Because you're still on the same axis as the vertical one. The vertical one's still the changing one, but since your center is not 0, 0 anymore, you're not adding to 0 anymore, you're adding to those new values. So that's where it's going to change a little bit. Okay? So now if I want to state what my vertices are, now it's going to be, so h is -2, and then k was 1, but plus or minus my a value, which is 4. Okay, so now my points are going to be a little different, so I'm going to have to state both of my vertices. So -2, if I do 1 plus 4, it gives me 5. And if I do 1 minus 4, that gives me -3. So those are my two vertices. My foci are going to be -2, comma, 1 plus or minus the square root of 7. Now here, because it's plus or minus 7, you can either choose to leave it, but it makes it hard to be able to identify either. So you might want to actually figure out the decimal, which is unfortunate, but makes it easier for you to graph visually later on. So 3.68 would be 1 plus square root of 7, and you can do just tenths if you'd like. And then 1 minus square root of 7 will be -1.6. Okay? So there's my foci. I know my b value. Remember the 3 is from the center. Okay, so here I've got all the important stuff. If you want to state the major axis, minor axis, that's fine. Major would be 8, because 2 times 4. Minor would be 6, because 2 times 3. But here, because you're not labeling it, I'll let it slide from now since we're moving stuff, because you've already added something to it. Let's take something off your plate, so don't worry about the major and minor axis so much. But if you wanted to find it, that was what it would be. So let's make a xy coordinate plane here. Okay, so now my center is at -2, 1. So -2, 1. Here's my center. And now I need to label that. Okay, and now I need to go -2, 5. So 1, 2, 3, 4. So there's a vertex of -2, 5. And then 1, 2, 3. Here's my other vertex, -2, 3, -3. Okay, and then now I need to graph my foci. So -2, 3.6, so that would be right about here. Okay, and -2, -1.6. Okay, now let's also go out to the right and the left with my b value. You don't have to state those points since they're not on the major axis, but 1, 2, 3 would be to the right, 1, 2, 3 to the left, and then that helps me get my shape for my ellipse, and that's my picture. Okay? Let's move on to the next picture. So here I have x squared minus 4x equals 36y minus 112. Okay, now when you're dealing with these, this is a parabola. Okay, so this is where the completing the square happens, because I need to have a perfect square on the side with the square to figure out what my center is. So I'm going to have to add a value to one side. So to complete this value, so remember half of the middle squared gets me that value, so negative 4 divided by 2 is negative 2, squared is 4. Okay, so then I got to add 4 to the other side. Then I got to be able to factor here. So x minus 2 and x minus 2, so that'll give me x minus 2 squared. Okay, over here I'm going to add like terms, so negative 112, plus 4 gives me negative 108. Okay, now on the right side I do need to factor so I can figure out what my 4p is and also what my value or for the vertex is for the y. So I can take out a 36, and so if I factor out 36, that leaves me with negative 3. So now I got my vertex, so it'll be 2, 3 for this one. My 4p is 36, so if I divide that out, that'll be 9. So my focus is, my distance from the focus or to the directrix is 9 away from the vertex. Now I also have to identify which axis I'm on, so I have an x squared one, so this opens up or down, but since p is positive, or 4p is positive, that means it opens just up. So you can cancel the down part out. Okay, so then I'm going to have a picture that's like the foci and the directrix are changing y value-wise. So remember that for your vertex, it would have been, for your foci, it would have been 0, p, and your directrix would have been y equals negative p. But now that you've changed, your foci will now be h, k plus p, and your directrix will now be y equals k minus p. Okay, so basically it's the same thing, except now instead of having an origin, you have numbers that you have to subtract from and add from, or add to. So for my foci, I have this point 2, 3 plus 9, and my directrix, I have y equals 3 minus 9. So we're kind of doing the same thing that we did before with the other points. So foci must be at the point 2, 12, and my directrix is the line y equals negative 6. Okay, so let's draw our line. My center is at 2, 3. So 3. Okay, let's go up 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9. There's my focus. Okay, and then my directrix. Okay, so now I draw my graph. And there's my picture. Okay, so, and I know it's insanely large. You can change the scale to help you fit it better, but that's just what I had to work with. Okay, have fun.